In the early days, emulation operated largely underground, neatly tucked away in various online forums and mostly kept out of the public eye. This was mainly due to a mix of legal and technical issues. ROM distribution was, and of course still is, a legal grey area, and Nintendo was no stranger to this, heavily cracking down on ROMs in the late 90s and early 2000s. It made emulation developers cautious, and they often would use online aliases and sometimes remain completely anonymous. Before social media, emulation communities existed on underground forums, IRC channels, and bulletin boards. And you couldn't just Google this information, you had to seek it out, or be connected with someone in the know. And finally, in order to run an emulator, much of the time you would need a PC powerful enough to handle full-speed 8 or 16-bit emulation with sound. And in 1998 this was not assured. A top-of-the-line 300MHz Pentium II could do the job, but these were very expensive, and most PC users had lower-spec Pentium I MMX machines. Without fast emulation often meant a compromised experience. But one emulator emerged in 1997 that made emulation more accessible to a larger audience by not only providing an easy-to-use user experience, it also brought speed and compatibility to lower-powered machines. That emulator is known as ZSNES. ZSNES is a Super Nintendo emulator best known for its speed and, at the time, high level of compatibility. The first public release was on October 14, 1997, and was originally coded by two people, ZS Knight and Demo. Little is known about both. However, ZS Knight would share information about himself in an Emulation Zone interview, stating that he was 20 years old and was a college student at Simon Fraser University in British Columbia in Canada. ZSNES began as a passion for both programming and emulation. ZS Knight was highly skilled in x86 assembly language, and most of the emulation code originally was developed in assembly. This meant that ZSNES ran fast even on the lower spec PCs. For example, a Pentium I 133 to 200 MHz PC was recommended for full-speed gameplay with sound, and you only really needed 16 MB of memory to run. Of course, a VGA-compatible graphics card was also required, but there was no 3D acceleration that was needed at the time. You could even get away with running ZSNES on a 486 PC, either with frame skip turned on or by disabling sound. Of course, other Super NES emulators existed at the time. ZSNES's main rival was SNES 9X, which was a very advanced and powerful emulator as well, and arguably was even more compatible than ZSNES. However, because it was mostly written in C code, it was slower and needed more demanding hardware to run. The main advantage of SNES 9X, initially at least, was that it was portable. In comparison, ZSNES, as we mentioned, was written in x86 assembly, which limits its targets to DOS, Windows, and x86-based Linux. However, its performance was unrivaled, and quickly became a fan favorite amongst emulation users. During 1998 to 2002, ZSNES underwent rapid development and introduced some major features to emulation. Early versions of ZSNES ran on DOS only and were command line based that admittedly did require an understanding of the target hardware to dial in the correct settings. Sound was also quite inaccurate, as documentation was still not fleshed out and some guesswork was needed to implement the SPC sound emulation layer. But it wouldn't be long before later versions would introduce the popular UI that made the emulator rise in popularity amongst the community. What was notable about this UI was that it was easy to use and very, very fast. But more importantly, it had the ability to apply features on the fly. For example, the first time that you launch ZSNES on DOS, the screen resolution defaults to 320 by 256 by 8, otherwise known as Mode X. Now, this mode is not ideal if you want to run games that require transparencies, which is just about every single one of them. In the settings, it's possible to switch this on the fly to any resolution that is supported. Ideally, you would select 640 by 480 by 16 to support blending and transparency correctly. Doing this on the fly will eliminate any transparency and blending issues that you had using an 8-bit per pixel screen. And this is just one example. The UI has many hotkeys that do many different things. It's possible to disable individual background layers, the sprite layer, and even dump the sound and music from any game to an SPC audio format that can be read and used by an external music player. Other notable additions was a comprehensive gamepad support that allowed for customizable inputs on DOS, Windows, and Linux. No easy feat, and it recognized many USB controllers. ZSNES also had support for specialized devices like the Adjustifier and Super Scope, as well as the mouse support for games such as Mario Paint. It even allowed switching between keyboard and gamepad inputs for the same player, which would be useful for alternating between control schemes. When it comes to save states, they are a commonplace in most emulators, but in 1998, many emulators, but not all of them, used them. ZSNES introduced a custom .zst extension which implemented a robust save state system that predated SNES 9X. Being able to save and load save states via a quick tap of a hotkey was a game changer, and made the emulation much more favorable over original hardware for this reason alone. Each game had up to 10 save state slots, more than enough to go around, and later versions of ZSNES implemented an early implementation of rewind functionality. This was essentially save states that let the player go back in time, which was defined in the UI configuration. By rapidly saving and loading states in the background and by pressing a hotkey, rewind functionality could be supported. In later versions of ZSNES, the .zst format could even embed a thumbnail which helped identify users' save states visually. Emulation could also be fast-forward, greatly speeding up gameplay. By simply holding down a mapped keyboard or joystick button, the emulation could be sped up significantly, and this would help with getting through cutscenes faster, or long unskippable sections of a particular game, or various intros, and as you can imagine, this was very popular with RPG users. Or take a look at this intro to Super Metroid, which could be fast-forwarded in rapid time. But it doesn't stop there. ZSNES would pioneer and build the foundation for what we would consider tool-assisted speedrunning. Within ZSNES, it's possible to record gameplay sessions by capturing a sequence of controller inputs per frame and an initial save state to create a replayable movie of any section of any game. This file format was known as .zmv, short for ZSNES Movie. Unlike traditional video capture, there is no raw bitmap frame stored at all. Instead, controller inputs per frame are captured along with an initial save state of the game and some metadata. This allows the emulation to recreate the gameplay and replay it back frame by frame. Since the ZMV files mainly contain controller input data, they are usually small and could be compressed with gzip to reduce them further. Due to their small size, .zmv files were ideal for sharing around on FTP sites and bulletin boards. Most users at the time still had dial-up modems and early broadband, and were quickly shared around various emulation communities and forums to demonstrate new speedrunning techniques or reveal gameplay secrets. Being able to share gameplay over dial-up modems made ZSNES a very popular emulator in the rise of tool-assisted speedrunning. And it would be not only the easy-to-use user interface, but its rich list of features that really set ZSNES apart from the competition. Cheat code support would also be an important feature that was added to the emulator. By using a .cht file, both Action Replay or Game Genie codes could be loaded and stored per game with an unlimited amount. Now of course this feature wasn't exclusive to ZSNES, but thanks to the easy-to-use UI, it was easy to load, enable and disable cheats, and this could be done on the fly thanks to the robust UI. ZSNES was one of the earliest Super NES emulators to implement Mode 7 functionality, as well as correct transparencies and custom chip support, including Super Effects, which saw its first implementation in May of 1998. While originally developed in assembly language, ZSNES was ported to C to make it more portable to other platforms, and one of the most landmark releases of the emulator was in 2001 with the 1.30 version, which supported the SDD1 custom chip, which opened up support for games such as Star Ocean and Street Fighter Alpha 2. Star Ocean in particular was a demanding game that used speech and enhanced graphics. Between 1999 and the end of 2000, there were over 40 individual releases packed full of enhancements, bug fixes, and new features. Of course, it wasn't perfect. One downside to ZSNES was its overall poor accuracy with some games, and it had some trouble emulating custom chips. By the late 2000s, it was surpassed by SNES 9X as computer hardware became faster and cheaper. In 2005, ZSNES would go open source, and by 2007, most of the development had ceased. But its legacy and lasting impact lives on. ZSNES was a pioneer in SNES emulation and helped popularize emulators to those outside of the community, and it's still very much fondly remembered by retro gamers for its role in the early emulation scene. Its ability to tweak features on the fly and enhance games to look and run better was massive for the time. Many of its features we discussed may not seem like a big deal, but in 1999, these features didn't exist. ZSNES was the first to bring them to us. It opened up the world of emulation to people outside of the underground scene, being able to record gameplay, share speedruns, rewind, fast forward, apply graphical filters, disable backgrounds, sound channels, apply cheats, play online with friends, made ZSNES the killer app for most people with PCs. And it's one of the reasons why the emulator is still so beloved even to this day. Bye for now.